keys to his brand new beach house to the woman he calls his real daughter, and I found out about it like any modern-day outcast does, on Facebook, scrolling through photos I was never meant to see. That kind of betrayal doesn't punch you in the face all at once. No, it simmers. It boils. It bubbles up quietly, like a pot you forgot on the stove, until it stinks up the whole damn house. I wasn't invited. Not even a text. Not even a "Hey, Mark, we're having a small get-together, but I know you're busy." Nothing. And the part that made my stomach tighten into a goddamn fist? He looked happy, beaming, even as he handed Emily those shiny silver keys on a ribbon like it was some sacred rite of passage. The house itself was no joke. Custom-built, white siding, wraparound porch, and a view of the ocean that most people would trade their spine for. I had heard rumors he was planning something on the coast after retiring, but I figured he'd at least mention it to me once it was done. I wasn't expecting him to slap a bow on it and hand it to my stepsister like she was the heir to a throne I didn't even know he built. There he stood in the photos, Dad, in his favorite navy blazer and that dumbass red pocket square he always thought made him look like Kennedy, grinning with pride like he just knighted her or something. And her? She was crying. Happy tears. She posted a caption that read, "Can't believe this. Thank you for everything, Dad. I'll take care of it always." It wasn't even the word dad that got me, it was the way she used it. So freely, so comfortably, like it had always belonged to her. And maybe, in some twisted way, it did. Because when I looked through the rest of the photos, there wasn't a trace of me. Not one. No old pictures of us, no awkward throwbacks, no mention, no tag, not even a sideways "wish you were here." It was like I'd been edited out of the family timeline. I sat there on my couch, beer in hand, blinking at my phone like maybe if I stared long enough, the screen would glitch and correct itself. But it didn't. Instead, I clicked through every single post. There were friends, coworkers, his golf buddies, even some guy from his Bible study. Lisa was there too, his second wife, all smiles and curls and wine glass in hand. And then, right in the middle of the album titled Retirement Weekend, a new chapter begins. I found the shot that did it, the one where he's handing Emily the keys, and the caption under it said, "Passing the torch to my daughter." Not stepdaughter. Not Emily. Just daughter. I won't lie, I sat there for a long time, just frozen, stuck in that stupid spiral of wondering what I did wrong. Was it the time I skipped his birthday because I had to work a double shift? Was it because I didn't come down for Thanksgiving last year? Or was it something deeper? Something from way back when I was 13 and told him I'd rather live with Mom full-time? Maybe he never forgave me for choosing sides, even if it was just a kid trying to survive two warring adults. Eventually, I did what I always do when I don't want to feel something. I got angry. Not loud, not violent. Just cold. I hit the block button on his number like I was swatting a fly. Deleted his email. Unfollowed every single person in those pictures. Then I stood up, tossed my phone on the table, and walked straight to the fridge like I could bury the betrayal in another cold one. But it followed me. That feeling. That pit in my stomach that said, "You've been replaced." The next morning, I woke up groggy, my head pounding more from emotion than beer. I thought about calling him, not to scream, not to fight, but just to ask, why? Just, why? But I didn't. I held back. Pride? Maybe. Fear? Probably. Instead, I went to my old Gmail account, the one I barely check anymore, and typed his name into the search bar. It was muscle memory at that point. I wasn't looking for anything, but what I found hit me like a slow punch to the ribs. There it was. A voice message. An old one. From over 3 years ago. Timestamped the night after Mom's funeral. I hadn't listened to it. Not once. Just marked it as read and let it rot there like some emotional landmine I didn't have the guts to step on. But now, with the taste of rejection still raw in my mouth, I hovered my finger over the play button. I didn't press it. Not yet. I sat there, staring at the message like it might reach out and grab me by the throat. My hand shook, And not because I was scared of what he'd said, but because I wasn't sure if it would change anything. Maybe he apologized. Maybe he cried. Maybe he said something human. Or maybe, and this is what I feared most, maybe it was nothing. Just another empty gesture from a man who was always better at performance than parenting. But now I had a choice to make. Listen, or leave it buried. Either way, something had shifted. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever shift back. You don't wake up one day and realize you've been replaced. It sneaks up on you, slow and quiet, like water eroding stone over decades, until one day you're standing in a room that used to feel like yours. And suddenly every piece of furniture's been rearranged to fit someone else. My earliest memory of something being off with my dad goes back to a Tuesday afternoon in the fall of '91, right after my parents split. When I was just 9 years old and still trying to make sense of why half my toys stayed in one house and the other half in a place that didn't smell like home anymore. Dad moved out first, packed up one weekend while I was at my friend Jordan's birthday party. When I came back, all that was left in the garage was the oil stain from his old Pontiac and a few loose nails where his tools used to hang. I didn't understand the logistics of divorce back then. I just thought he'd be back after a few days, maybe once he cooled off from yelling about the thermostat or the phone bill. But he didn't come back, not then and not really ever. At first, we did the usual weekend shuffle. Every other Friday night, he'd pick me up in his car, always blasting some Bruce Springsteen song like he was trying to prove he was still young and free, even though his hairline was already starting to run for the hills. We'd go to the movies, maybe bowling, get pizza, surface-level stuff, like two people pretending they knew each other well. But that first year, I noticed something that stuck with me more than I wanted it to. His eyes didn't light up when I showed him my art projects anymore. He'd say, "That's cool, buddy," without even looking. He stopped coming to parent-teacher nights. Forgot my birthday once. Said it was because he had a work emergency. But I saw the receipt in his glove box, fancy steakhouse, 2 guests. The cracks widened when Lisa entered the picture. She was nice, at first fake nice, like the lady at the bank who compliments your haircut but doesn't mean it. Blonde, always perfectly styled, smelled like vanilla perfume, and had that laugh that made people feel like she'd already judged them before the joke was finished. She moved in with my dad after about 6 months of just dating, and brought Emily with her. Emily was a year younger than me, always in ballet or theater camp or some other expensive-sounding hobby that required my dad to show up and clap like she was winning a Tony. The first time I met her, Emily gave me this smile like she already knew what was happening, like she could see how uncomfortable I felt sitting on my dad's new couch while she showed off the bedroom he decorated for her with new furniture and matching curtains. My room? Fold-out cot in the guest room, leftover comforter from the old house, still smelled faintly of mothballs and basement. It wasn't long before she started calling him Dad. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids mimic what they see. But after a while, it stuck. She'd run up to him, arms open, yelling, "Dad," and he'd scoop her up like it was the best sound he'd ever heard. And me? I stood there holding my overnight bag, waiting for someone to notice I'd arrived. Sometimes, Lisa would say something like, "Oh, hi, Mark, I didn't hear the door." But I knew they heard. They just didn't care. The turning point, though, the moment the invisible line got etched in concrete, was during a barbecue he threw one summer. I must have been 15. His friends from work were over, laughing it up in the backyard while he grilled steaks and sipped on imported beer he never used to buy when it was just me and him. I was inside grabbing a soda when I overheard him talking to his buddy Dave, loud enough that the words came through the screen door clear as day. He said, "Emily's more my kid than Mark ever was." And then he laughed. That laugh didn't leave me for a long time. It crawled inside my chest and just sat there. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I just stood there, can in hand, listening like a ghost no one realized was still haunting the place. That night, I told Mom I didn't want to go over anymore. She didn't push it. She knew something had changed. And that's the thing, after a while, you stop fighting to be noticed. You just let them forget you. Years passed like that. High school, then college, jobs, marriage, divorce, life kept moving, and Dad kept living his other life with his new daughter and perfect little family. I'd get a birthday text here and there, always late, always generic. "Hope you're well, kiddo." That was his favorite one. Kiddo. Like he was still entitled to that nickname. Emily, meanwhile, graduated with a theater degree, started working some event planning gig, and never stopped being the center of his universe. She was in every photo, every holiday card he sent to distant relatives. You'd think she was blood. You'd think I never existed. It used to bother me more. That raw kind of bother, the kind that leaves you bitter and twitchy. But over time, it dulled into this quiet ache I carried around like a bone that healed wrong. I told myself I didn't care. That he could have his new family, his new daughter, his glossy life. But the truth is, a part of me always held out some pathetic hope that maybe one day he'd call and say, "I screwed up. You were always my son." He never did. Instead, he posted a photo of Emily holding keys to a beach house I never saw, wearing that red pocket square like a crown. And just like that, I remembered every moment that led to this. Every missed call, every forgotten game, every time he left early or didn't show up at all. Some people lose their fathers to death. I lost mine to a carefully curated replacement. And I wasn't even sure he noticed. The last time my dad called me son, it slid out of his mouth like a leftover habit, not a word packed with meaning or warmth, but more like muscle memory, a phrase you say without thinking because saying nothing would be too obviously cruel. It was a warm Sunday afternoon about 6 years ago, early spring, the kind of day where everything feels like it's starting fresh, except for me, who was walking into a memory I wish I'd let rot in silence. He'd called me the day before, unexpectedly, out of the blue, and with that cheerful tone he always put on when he needed something. Said he was moving a few things into a new storage unit because he and Lisa were doing some downsizing, and could I come by and lend a hand? It had been months since we last spoke, and I had already been through enough mental gymnastics deciding whether I was still supposed to pretend we had a relationship. But something about the way he asked made me feel like maybe he was trying. So, like an idiot, I said yes. I pulled up to his house in my old Ford pickup, still dented from a snowstorm 2 winters back, and saw Emily's new SUV already in the driveway. The sun glinted off the windshield like it was mocking me. I remember hesitating before getting out, sitting there for a second with the engine idling, like I was waiting for a voice in my head to say, "Turn around, Mark, this isn't your home anymore." But I didn't. I shut off the truck, grabbed my gloves from the passenger seat, and walked up to the garage like a dutiful son. He was in the garage with a clipboard, of all things, ticking off items from a list like we were on a military operation. Emily was already there, sorting boxes with labels written in neat black Sharpie, Christmas decor, old photos, Emily's childhood. There wasn't a box with my name on it. Not even one. He greeted me with a half hug, the kind where his arm sort of hovered behind my back like he wasn't sure how close to get. "Hey, good to see you, son," he said, and it was so casual, so damn light, like we hadn't spent the last year ignoring each other's birthdays. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but inside I could feel the heat rising behind my ears, that familiar burn of being welcome but not wanted. We started moving boxes into the truck, mostly his old files, framed certificates from a career I was never a part of, and golf trophies no one ever cared about. He handed me a box labeled books, Dad's office, and I could feel the weight in more than one way. Inside were volumes I remembered from his study growing up, books he used to read, while ignoring me on weekends, investment guides, biographies, hardcovers with gold lettering that smelled like leather and dust. Nothing of mine in there. No sign I'd ever spent a single minute in his world. At one point, Emily walked by carrying a box that looked way too heavy for her, and he rushed to help her, setting down what he was doing to make sure she didn't lift a damn finger too long. I watched from the corner, holding 2 boxes by myself, waiting for him to look back and realize he'd left me standing there like hired help. He didn't. She laughed, called him dad, and made a joke about how he was going to throw his back out for her someday. He laughed too, and said, "I'd do it in a heartbeat, kiddo." That word again. Kiddo. Later, we were almost done, and I asked if he needed anything else. He looked up from the clipboard and said, "No, I think we're good. You can go, Mark. Emily and I can handle the last of it." And, just like that, I was dismissed. Like a mover who'd reached his hourly limit. Not a thank you, not a let's grab dinner sometime. Just, you can go. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove in silence, staring straight ahead, chewing the inside of my cheek until it bled. I couldn't stop hearing the way he said Emily and I like they were the team, the unit, the family. And me? I was just a guy who showed up and did the heavy lifting. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? Drop a comment if you've ever been replaced by someone who didn't even earn it. Because I promise you, that moment stays with you. It lingers. It builds its own apartment in the back of your brain and pays rent in bitterness. I didn't talk to him much after that. A few texts here and there. A half-hearted happy birthday every year. I kept it surface level, professional, like we were ex-coworkers pretending to be friendly for appearances. I started leaving his messages on read, letting calls go to voicemail, answering when I felt guilty enough, or bored enough, or angry enough to remember he was still alive. But then, just 2 months ago, out of nowhere, he called again. Not a text. Not a forwarded email from Lisa. A real call. From his number. It was mid-afternoon, and I was on my lunch break, sitting on a bench outside my warehouse job, staring at a bag of cold fries. I saw his name on the screen, and for a split second, I almost hit decline. But curiosity won, and I let it ring through to voicemail instead. An hour later, I finally listened. His voice was softer than I remembered. Not weak, just tired. He said he needed to talk, man to man, his words, not mine. He didn't say what about. Didn't mention Emily. Didn't mention the house, or the party, or anything that should have come with a damn apology. He just said, "Call me back, son. I think it's time we talked." And for the first time in years, I didn't know what the hell he meant by son. There's something particularly sickening about watching your childhood memories get gutted and sold off like some piece of property that lost its value the minute your mother lost the marriage. The house I'm talking about, the one that eventually became the seed money for the goddamn beach house, wasn't just a house. It was a place where I learned how to ride a bike, skinned my knees in the driveway, and sat in front of the TV every Saturday morning eating dry cereal while my dad read the newspaper and half listened to my rambling about cartoons. That house had bones, and they were ours. Mine and my mom's. And the day my dad walked out, he didn't just leave. It was like he took a wrecking ball to every piece of normal we'd ever built. Now, when the divorce happened, I was too young to understand all the legal wrangling that went on behind closed doors. But I knew enough to remember the word settlement being thrown around like a grenade during arguments. I remember my mom sitting at the kitchen table late one night with a pile of papers in front of her, red eyes, a glass of wine untouched. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me, "Nothing, sweetheart. Just the cost of peace." I didn't get it back then, but years later, I found out exactly what she meant. Because part of that so-called peace deal was that she let him keep the house, with the understanding that she'd get a financial payout once he sold it. But of course, my dad had other ideas. Instead of selling the place and writing her a check like a decent man might have done, he took out a line of credit against the house's equity, funneled it into some early investments with Lisa, back when she was still pretending to be just a friend, and then used that windfall to flip the property into what he eventually referred to as a retirement dream asset. The man never used simple words when he could pull something off a financial brochure. He sold the house without ever telling us, pocketed the gains, and walked away clean. My mom, too tired to fight another court battle, let it go. She always said she didn't want to bleed more time and energy into a man who would never give back what he took. I should have been angrier about it. But when you've spent your whole life trying to keep peace between people who've already declared emotional war, you start picking your battles like a prisoner rationing cigarettes. Still, that house stayed in my head. And when I saw those photos of Emily standing on the porch of the new beach house, holding those keys, wearing that "I've earned this" smile, something inside me cracked in a way I didn't think was still possible. The porch looked almost identical. Same white railing, same dark blue shutters, even the same wind chimes my mom used to hang, except now they were new and soulless, probably bought off some catalog that promised coastal elegance. He didn't just build a new house. He built a replacement for the one he took from us. And then he handed it to someone who didn't even remember where the original bricks came from. It's one thing to feel forgotten. It's another thing entirely to watch your legacy get rewritten in real time. That house was supposed to be for me and my mom. He told her once, back before things turned poisonous, that the house was where he saw our family grow old. I guess he meant a different family. I guess he meant Lisa and Emily. What gets me most is that I didn't even know about the sale until years later when I had to file taxes and needed some old property documents. I found out the house was long gone, listed under some LLC that he and Lisa formed, and all I could think was how quietly it happened. Like burying something in the night and hoping no one noticed the disturbed earth in the morning. So when I saw the photos, when I saw him giving Emily those keys, it wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. The worst kind. The kind where they rewrite history and pretend you were never in the first draft. And then, just when I thought I was done caring, the universe spun the wheel again. I got a call from my ex-wife, of all people, Jessica. We've been divorced 4 years now, co-parenting our teenage son with the kind of strained truce you only get when both parties are too tired to argue anymore. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks, so when she called, I thought maybe something had happened with our kid. But no. Her voice was tight, measured, like she was trying not to sound too surprised by the words she was about to say. "Your dad's been trying to reach you," she said. "He asked me to pass along a message." I didn't say anything at first. Just let the silence stretch. She sighed on the other end of the line like she knew I was building a wall already. "He's in the hospital," she added. "Something cardiac. Not life-threatening, but serious enough." That should have hit harder. It should have dropped me, or at least sent some ripple of panic through my chest. But all I felt was this weird coldness, like someone had opened a freezer in my chest. I asked her why he didn't just call me himself. "He said you blocked his number," she replied, not accusing, just stating fact. "And he said he doesn't know how much time he has left to make things right." Those last few words clung to me longer than I liked. Make things right. As if years of silence, erasure, and inheritance gymnastics could be wrapped up neatly with one hospital visit and a handshake. I didn't tell her whether I'd go. Didn't say yes. Didn't say no. I just said thanks and hung up. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the same voicemail notification I hadn't deleted yet. His voice was still waiting for me, like a ghost trying to press its face through the glass. Emily didn't show up to the hospital. Lisa, apparently, had left him 6 months earlier, some quiet separation that nobody bothered to tell me about. I wondered if he thought of me now that the house was quiet, the walls echoing with absence, the legacy he curated so carefully starting to fall apart around him. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of a question I couldn't answer. What do you owe a man who gave your place away? There were so many times I sat at my desk or lay in bed with the light from my phone burning into my face, and I wrote messages I never had the guts or the anger or maybe just the energy to send. Some of them were long and thoughtful, pages that read like confessions, pouring out every bruise and scrape from all the years he'd left me to pick up after the mess he made with his absence. Others were short and sharp, just a line or two of venom I wanted him to taste, something cruel enough to sting, but not enough to feel like I was giving him more of me than he deserved. The first one I ever drafted, I was 17, lying on the couch in my mom's house, phone in hand, after he canceled one of our rare weekends together. Said something about a scheduling conflict, probably some gala or golf retreat with Lisa. I sat there for hours rewriting a single paragraph that started with, "You don't get to pick and choose when I matter to you." I didn't send it. I told myself it was better not to start something I knew he wouldn't finish. That became a pattern. Every year, around my birthday, I'd sit down and think about calling him, and then instead I'd write something on a napkin or in the Notes app on my phone, or even once on the back of a takeout receipt I found in the car. The messages always had the same bones. You let me go, you chose someone else, you rewrote your family like I was a typo in your life story. I'd read them over and imagine his face as he read them, how his jaw might tighten or his brow would furrow in that familiar, disappointed way. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to know exactly how it felt when he called Emily his real daughter, and thought the world wouldn't notice the empty space he left behind. Sometimes I'd write apologies too, and that was worse. I'd catch myself typing things like, "I'm sorry if I made it harder for you to be my dad," as if it had been my responsibility to make myself lovable enough for him to stick around. I hated those drafts the most. They were like swallowing glass, just to blame myself for the bleeding. They stayed hidden in folders or tucked behind other files, proof that even when I wanted to scream, some small part of me still wanted to be chosen. There was a letter I wrote after my son was born. That one felt different. I remember watching my kid sleep for the first time, tiny fingers curled into a fist against my chest, and I thought, this is how it's supposed to feel. That fierce, unshakable bond, the one I never got from him. I went home that night and typed 4 pages of raw, aching truth. I told him being a dad wasn't something you clocked into on weekends or bought your way through with gifts and good optics. I told him what he missed by not being there when I needed him most, teaching me how to shave, how to drive, how to deal with the kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from girls, but from your own damn blood. I saved it under a file named "If You Ever Ask," but he never did. And now here I was again, sitting in my truck parked across from the hospital, phone in hand, trying to write something that didn't sound like an obituary. I thought maybe this time I'd hit send. Maybe this time I'd let it all fly. I wrote, "Rick, because that's what you are now, not Dad." I saw the photos. I saw who got the keys in the house, and the smile you used to save for me when I was 6 years old and thought you could do no wrong. You gave everything to someone else and left me with silence. I'm not mad anymore. I'm just tired. And I don't know if I want to fix anything, because some things break and stay that way. But I'm here. Not for you. For me. And I stared at it, reread it, changed 2 words, and then put the phone down. I didn't send it. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, engine off, no music playing, and thought about all the times I tried to pretend this wasn't still eating at me. I thought about the time I graduated college and looked out into the crowd hoping to see him. I thought about the voicemail he left after Mom's funeral that I still hadn't listened to. I thought about the photo of Emily crying with joy on the porch of the house he promised to someone else decades ago. I thought about every goddamn sentence I ever typed and deleted and whether any of it would have made a difference. Eventually, I opened the truck door and stepped out. The hospital was just across the street, a flat gray building under a flat gray sky, and everything about it felt temporary and unkind. I walked slowly, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I didn't know who I was walking in as the son, the stranger, the last piece of guilt he hadn't checked off yet. At the front desk, I gave them his name. They told me he was in recovery, heart procedure 2 days ago, stable but weak. No visitors today except family, they said, and I almost laughed out loud. Because I didn't even know what the hell that word meant anymore. I stood there, staring at the sign-in sheet, pen in hand, and realized I had never actually decided what I was going to say. No letter. No script. No message. I didn't walk away. I signed my name. And I walked down the hall, not because I forgave him, and not because he deserved it, but because there was still one thing I hadn't written down, one thing I needed to say out loud. And I wasn't sure if I'd be able to say it without breaking. Hospitals always have that weird smell, a mix of disinfectant, recycled air, and a faint undercurrent of dread, like even the walls know people only come here when something's broken or about to be. I remember thinking that as I stepped out of the elevator onto the fourth floor, the rubber soles of my boots squeaking slightly on the polished linoleum. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times on the walk from the parking lot, tried to figure out what I'd say first, whether I'd go for bitter or neutral or maybe even act like I cared just to throw him off. But all of that planning unraveled the second I saw his name printed on the door like he was just another aging man lying in a room waiting for someone to care. The room itself was quiet, dim, one of those single-occupancy units with a window that looked out over a cracked rooftop and a few struggling trees planted in the parking lot below. He was propped up in bed, for in one arm, wires stuck to his chest, and that pale look of someone who had been knocked off his pedestal and wasn't sure yet if he was falling or floating. I stood there in the doorway for a second longer than I probably should have, just staring, letting him feel the weight of it before I said a word. He looked up, and I saw the recognition flicker behind his eyes, slow and a little unsure, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. "Mark," he said, voice dry and cracking like old paper. "You came." I didn't respond right away. I walked in, sat down in the stiff chair beside his bed, and rested my hands on my knees like I was at some awkward job interview I couldn't wait to leave. He looked thinner, smaller somehow, like the hospital had deflated whatever pride he'd been coasting on for the last 2 decades. And even though I could see the effort it took for him to sit up a little straighter and meet my eyes, there was still something in his expression that pissed me off, like he thought this was some kind of reunion and not a reckoning. "I didn't come for a heartfelt chat," I said, my voice lower than I expected. "You asked for help. So, what do you need?" He winced, not physically but emotionally, the way someone does when they realize their leverage is gone. He nodded slowly, cleared his throat, and motioned toward the small table by the bed where a folder "Saturday, it's the house," he said. "Bills, paperwork, insurance stuff. And the estate. I need someone to help manage it. Emily's been hard to reach lately. She's busy, got her own life." I almost laughed at that last part, not because it was funny but because of the pathetic predictability of it. Of course she was hard to reach. She got the house, the legacy, the performance of being the golden child, and now that things weren't shiny anymore, she'd vanished like a magician's rabbit. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and picked up the folder, flipping through the pages casually, as if I was doing him a favor by humoring his request instead of what it really was, a shift in power. "I can help," I said, slowly, carefully, "but only if I'm handling everything. No calls to Emily. No last-minute handoffs. I don't share responsibility with someone who forgets birthdays." He looked at me then with a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, maybe shame, maybe recognition, or maybe just the realization that he no longer got to call the shots. He didn't argue. He just nodded again and leaned back against the pillow, suddenly more tired than he'd been when I walked in. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said after a long pause. "I know I messed things up. I wanted to say something cruel. I wanted to throw 20 years of silence back in his face and tell him he didn't just mess things up, he rewrote history like I was a typo. But I didn't. I just sat there, quiet, and let the moment hang between us like a fog that neither of us knew how to clear. He talked a little more after that about the accounts, the property taxes, the lawyer he hadn't seen in months. It was all mechanical, clinical, like he was passing off a project he'd lost interest in. I listened, made mental notes, nodded when necessary, but inside, my mind was already elsewhere. Because the truth was, I didn't come here just to help. I came here because I saw the opportunity to take something back, not for revenge exactly, but for balance. For closure. For the part of me that had spent most of my adult life trying not to care about the fact that he never gave a damn until it was too late. Before I left, he reached out, weak fingers brushing my wrist. "Thank you, son," he said, soft, almost whispered. I pulled my hand back like he'd burn me. "You don't get to call me that," I said, standing up. His mouth opened slightly, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but no sound came out. I grabbed the folder, turned toward the door, and paused just long enough to make sure he knew this wasn't over. "I'll take care of it," I said. "But there's a condition." He looked at me then with wide, uncertain eyes. I didn't tell him what the condition was. Not yet. I walked out and left the cold room behind, but the colder part, the one inside me, came with me. They started calling it the favor like it was some noble thing, like I had been summoned from the far edges of estrangement and chosen to fulfill a sacred duty for a man everyone suddenly remembered had a son after all. My name began popping up in casual conversation again, soft reintroductions from Lisa's old friends and Rick's former golf buddies, who were shocked to hear I was back around and stepping up. The phone calls shifted, too. A few from the hospital administrator, one from his accountant, even a short, awkward voicemail from the estate lawyer asking to confirm I was the new point of contact per Mr. Delaney's wishes. That part hit me in a strange way. Mr. Delaney's wishes. He hadn't had many wishes for me before. At least none that involved more than keeping his distance and maintaining his preferred image of a man who'd simply grown apart from his son through unfortunate but understandable life circumstances. Now suddenly, I was the responsible one, the reliable adult son stepping in like a prodigal hero who never stopped loving his old man. The illusion was almost too easy to play into. I answered the calls, showed up to meetings, asked intelligent questions about property taxes and investment portfolios, and took notes like I actually cared. Even the lawyer, a guy named Dan something or other with a cheap suit and the emotional intelligence of a toaster, started warming up to me after a while. I played my part with patience, not because I enjoyed it, but because I knew exactly what I was doing and where this was going. Back at the hospital, I visited every third day, not enough to look desperate for approval, but just consistent enough that the staff remembered my name. I brought coffee, checked the mail, made sure his prescriptions were filled, and listened while he rambled about medical bills and long-term care costs like I hadn't been living in the real world the entire time he'd been playing retiree king on the coast. I didn't argue. I didn't mention the years. I didn't mention the damn beach house. I just nodded, took the paperwork, and smiled in that calm, middle-aged son way that makes people believe everything's fine. Even Emily called, once. I had tracked her down through one of her event planning clients. When she picked up, her voice was bright at first, full of that shallow cheer people put on when they're scared of what they're about to hear. When I told her who it was, the tone cracked just enough for me to enjoy it. "Is he okay?" she asked, like she'd been expecting a funeral announcement. "He's alive," I said. "He asked about you." She didn't ask about me. Not once. Just said she was busy with a wedding in Napa and would try to call him in a few days. She never did, but I told Rick she did anyway. He smiled like a tired man pretending to believe in fairy tales. Meanwhile, I kept working behind the scenes. One lawyer meeting turned into 3. I started combing through his estate paperwork, finding every loophole, every old clause, every assumption he made when he thought he'd die surrounded by the people who posed in his Christmas cards. The beach house wasn't in Emily's name yet. He'd made the classic arrogant mistake of assuming intentions held weight without signatures. The property was still technically held in a trust, under his control, though he'd already told half the world it belonged to her. He'd drawn up new paperwork that would transfer it to her once he passed, but he hadn't finalized the sign-off. That small oversight, that tiny crack in the perfect plan, was where I wedged myself in. One afternoon, 2 weeks after he came home from the hospital, I arrived with a folder tucked under my arm and a bland smile on my face. He was sitting in the living room, blanket across his legs, pretending to read a financial magazine he hadn't touched in days. "You doing okay?" I asked, already placing the folder on the table between us. He nodded. "Better. Still weak. But getting there." "I brought some paperwork," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Dan said it'd help streamline things." Just gives me power of attorney in case anything urgent comes up. He hesitated, eyes scanning mine like he wasn't sure if this was a favor or a trap. But he didn't argue. He trusted me now, at least enough to think I had his best interests at heart, or maybe just enough to think I wouldn't burn the place down while he napped. He signed. The pen dragged across the bottom of the page, shaky and slow, but the line was clean. I thanked him, smiled, put the paper back in the folder, and told him I'd stop by later in the week to check in. He nodded, mumbled something about appreciation and family and how maybe this is our way back. I didn't say much, just stood up, patted him on the shoulder like someone who forgives by habit, and walked outside into the early evening air that smelled like wet concrete and second chances I didn't believe in. Later that night, I scheduled a call with Dan, the estate lawyer. Not the usual public office call. This one was private, logged through his direct line, set for early the next morning when Rick would still be asleep. I had questions, detailed questions about the trust, about the legal transfer process, about what rights I now had, and what doors I could open without asking permission again. I wasn't just managing his estate anymore. I was about to reshape it. And none of them had any idea what was coming. The thing about power, real power, is that it rarely looks like revenge, rarely comes with screaming or broken plates or dramatic exits. Most of the time, it looks quiet and subtle, wrapped in paperwork and dry conversations, slipping through unnoticed until the moment it's too late to stop. That's exactly how it felt the morning I signed the final document, sitting across from Dan, the estate lawyer, while he explained the last details in that low, precise voice of his, the kind that made it clear he wasn't concerned with morality, only legality. And legally speaking, everything I was doing was airtight. With the power of attorney Rick handed me so willingly, I didn't need anyone's permission to make financial decisions in his name. I didn't need Lisa's opinion or Emily's blessing or even Rick's approval beyond the signature he'd already given me. I could have drained his accounts and vanished if I'd wanted, but that wasn't what this was about, not really. This was about something deeper than money. This was about taking back something I'd never even realized had been stolen from me until I saw it in Emily's hands. The trust fund meant for Emily hadn't been distributed yet, just sitting there, gathering interest, waiting for a man in a hospital bed to put his final stamp on a document that would pass everything to the daughter he claimed without hesitation or shame. But that stamp hadn't happened. And thanks to the timing of Rick's heart scare, his desire to feel like a good father again, and a little gentle persuasion from me, that authority now belonged to someone else entirely. I had Dan draw up new documents that morning, nothing flashy, just a quiet redirection of the inheritance into a charitable foundation. I called it the Marianne Delaney Scholarship Fund. My mom's full name. I made sure it was clear in the mission statement, for first-generation college students from single-parent households who had been overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. Students who knew what it felt like to be invisible in their own families, to be second priority or no priority at all. The amount wasn't massive, but it was enough to help some kids get where they were going without having to claw through the same walls I had to punch my way out of. It wasn't about legacy, not really. I didn't care if anyone ever knew I had done it. I just needed to know that not every cent of what Rick built went toward buying another polished photo op for someone who didn't know what it was like to be gutted and hollowed out by a parent who only showed up when it suited them. That afternoon, after the paperwork had been filed, I sat in my truck with the engine off, staring at the dashboard like it held answers I wasn't brave enough to ask out loud. I thought about calling him, thought about telling him straight to his face what I'd done, but there was a small part of me that didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a confrontation. Because he'd twist it into some kind of final teachable moment, try to shape it into a story about heartbreak or reconciliation or whatever version of the truth he needed to believe to sleep at night. So instead, I opened the voice memo app on my phone, hit record, and said everything I'd been choking down for years. You told me blood doesn't make family. So I made sure your money doesn't either. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then hit send, and watched it disappear into the message thread that had been dead for almost a year. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want one. But hours later, just as the sun was dipping behind the trees and the light turned that deep amber that makes everything look like a memory, my phone buzzed. One new voice message from Rick. No transcription. Just a file with a timestamp and a play button waiting for me to press it. I didn't. I listened to the silence around me instead. Let the quiet remind me that some messages don't need to be heard, not because they aren't filled with emotion or confession or last-minute apologies, but because whatever they contain won't change what's already been carved into the years we wasted pretending to be something we weren't. He'll never know what I did. Or maybe he will, and maybe that's the final punishment, not the loss of money, but the loss of illusion. The loss of control. The realization that the son he ignored was the only one who showed up in the end, and not to save him, but to write the last sentence of a story he thought he owned. I drove home with the windows down, the wind filling the cab like a reminder that air, unlike love, doesn't need to be earned. I passed the turnoff to the hospital without looking, drove right by the exit like it was part of a town I'd only ever visited out of obligation. At home, I opened the fridge, poured myself a drink, and stood by the window as the last light slipped away. My phone sat on the counter, the message still unopened. I looked at it once, thought about it twice, and left it alone. Some messages don't need to be heard, and some families don't need to be forgiven.